and learning does not take place in declarative memory without the support of the transient episodic memory module and a consolidation process that happens offline. So transient episodic memory, it's a short duration, and by short duration we mean on the order of hours, potentially up to a day. There's no hard limit, but it's somewhere on the order of that. And this is probably in part inspired by what is causing consolidation typically in humans, which would be a sleep cycle. So the sleep cycle usually is a daily cycle, and this is where we would hypothesize for humans that the consolidation process happens. So transient episodic memory, short-term store of events and episodes, and above and beyond the support transient episodic memory gives to the learning process of declarative memories, there's another motivating example for why transient episodic memory may be important for a cognitive model. So consider the example of a parking garage, where I park in that same parking garage day after day after day. So I might have multiple different episodes. Episode 1 where I park in one particular spot, episode 2 where I park in a different spot within that same garage, all the way up to some number of n episodes. If we were just dealing with a declarative memory store, because there's so much similarity between these different episodes, they're likely to interfere with each other where you may not actually be able to remember specifically where you were parking any particular day. And we see that when we talk about longer durations, say it's a week, for example. I may not know where I parked last week in that parking garage. However, we're pretty good, or at least reasonably good, at figuring out where I parked today. And to support that ability over a short duration of time to figure out details like this, which might interfere with each other, transient episodic memory comes to save us there, to help to prevent that interference event. Okay, so what I've explained so far, sensory memory, the preconscious workspace, which is labeled workspace in this diagram, codelets like the structure building codelets, perceptual associative memory, transient episodic memory, declarative memory, all of those things go into supporting what in the cognitive cycle slide relates to the perception and understanding phase.
Maybe it's better when you do real presentation, you should point by some way if you have laser.
I wish I had a laser pointer.
Okay.
I don't have one. I wish I had it though.
Okay.
Oh, we do have one then.
Yeah. Do we still have working laser pointers? Okay.
Yeah.
I might have to steal the kitten's laser pointer.
Yeah, we just got one for Christmas.
Ah, yeah. Sweet, cool. Yeah. So yeah, I'll have to remember to do that. So.
Feisty has a toy that could serve as a laser pointer.
Squeaky chicken? Thanks, Dachi. Yeah, that's a good advice. Bring a laser pointer to point at locations.
There may be an animation that you can use that will jump or flash or something like that too.
Yeah, that's kind of how I dealt with that issue and other things by animations. That might be another way of doing it. But I'd love to have the laser pointer because I'd like to be able to point at stuff if possible. So yeah, that's definitely good advice. Okay, so now that we've talked about the perception understanding phase, let's go on and start talking about the attention phase. So the global workspace, which we've talked about several times now.
Sean,
Yeah.
something you might think about.
In the previous slide or in this one?
The phases slide is another one that could come in briefly, saying,
So like we've covered this part of it or something like
Yeah.
that?
but anyway, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Well, let me at least write that down anyway. Use the phases.
It's a couple of weeks off before the public talk, isn't it?
Yeah, 2.5. Yeah, so we got 2.5 weeks.
Okay.
It's the phases diagram to show progress. Yeah, if we want, I mean, I know that we're going to go over today do you want to try to do a meeting next Saturday? Is everyone available next Saturday for an encore? Starting where we, I guess on an encore about a continuation?
We don't have to, let's not discuss that now, we're not.
Okay, great. All right, so I marked that. All right, so, okay, so the global workspace. So within the global workspace, coalitions compete to be broadcast. So a coalition really represents a set of concerns for the agent. And we're going to talk through how attention codelets help to support the creation of coalitions. So the competition is a very simple competition. The coalition with the highest activation will win. But one of the complexities is that the global workspace is one of two modules within the LIDA conceptual model that does not operate asynchronously. So action selection, which we're going to see later on, and the global workspace actually have a synchronous process. And that synchronous process in the global workspace is driven by triggers, where the trigger indicates when the competition happens. So to give an example of that, a trigger may be that you have a particular coalition that has a total activation that is higher than some threshold. Therefore, that coalition, because it looks like it's so salient, that it contains content that's so salient, it may induce that competition. Or maybe a group of coalitions together have a total activation between them all that is above some threshold. As a result, that initiates a competition in the global workspace. Finally, you might have a situation where a certain amount of time has elapsed since the last competition occurred, and as a result, the trigger fires off where you have a competition that occurs. So I'm going to go through this in a little detail about the relationship between the current situational model and the content that's in there, the attention codelets, which we've introduced but didn't really show exactly what they did, and then the global workspace and the end results of the global workspace.
Have you defined coalitions prior to this? Because it
No, I
seemed to
did
me like
not.
a bit of a jump.
Yeah, I tried to say that it was sort of that it represented concerns of the agent, but I didn't really. The best way that I have right now to do it is through this diagram, but it's probably a good point. Maybe I need to think of some way of introducing it
I
better.
think there is a better way.
Well, if you mention attention,
Yeah.
well, you mentioned attention codelets already. If you can somehow indicate on that slide or a subsequent slide that the attention codelets are building these coalitions, then there's a segue.
Yeah,
That's a good suggestion.
yeah, I can put that in. Yeah, that's definitely a good suggestion.
Maybe you can have the little,
It's just one sentence.
yeah, or and maybe even a little artwork with the red ant building a coalition somehow. I don't know how, but.
Something. This one comes close to, so there's an
Okay.
animation at the bottom that kind of does that, what you're talking about a little bit. Not great, but okay, add something about coalitions here. Okay, yeah, that'll be great. That'll be easier to do. All right. So we've talked about the current situational model, how it contains pre-conscious representations related to the agent's current situation. Attention codelets monitor the current situational model, looking for particular content of interest to each attention codelet. Each attention codelet has something specific in mind, and they're all different in what they're interested in. If they find content that they're interested in, the attention codelets will take that content, these pre-conscious representations, and will add those to the global workspace, where the global workspace, after a coalition form.
You didn't say that the attention codelet will take it to the workspace, did you?
I said the attention codelet would add it to the workspace.
Yeah, it's the coalition that does that.
So that, well, okay, so we have to bring in the coalition forming process then.
Yeah.
So maybe to say something like, so the attention codelets identify pre-conscious representations which, through a coalition forming process, become coalitions in the global workspace.
Mhm. Yes.
That graph almost has done that. You see,
Yeah.
it's very similar.
Yeah, you kind of have to talk to it a little, yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, I think the only issue for me here is that text needs to come up after this picture's on the screen instead of before. Because I think once you have coalitions in the global workspace by this process, now they can reference. See, so that's what
That's
was.
a good idea.
Yeah,
For
okay,
me-
so start with the animation and then pop up the 3
Yeah.
bullets afterwards.
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because otherwise, somebody who doesn't know it, our stuff is left hanging, what does this mean? But
Yep.
now, there's a
Yep.
place to put it.
Yeah, and that leads directly into it. I think that's great. So,
That's a good suggestion.
animation first, then 3 bullets. And actually, I think it's going to make the slide look a lot nicer too, because I was struggling with this because this looks ugly by itself. The 3 bullets, like, ew, why did you do that? And it's like if you lead in with this and then pop up the 3, it's just a prettier slide. Yeah, so that's great. Okay. So, all right, so I talked about pre-conscious representations, coalition forming process. Now we're at the coalitions. So, so since this is the first time I'm actually introducing this, so within the global workspace, a competition occurs between the coalitions where, let me see, what do I want to say? Do I even need the text? It's like I introduced all this stuff from that text in this diagram.
Well, no, I think the text helps because you can't see a competition in the diagram. You can't see the highest activation.
But the question is, when do I actually mention the competition? So I'm going to have this whole diagram, this animation going, and so here I kind of have to mention the competition at least a little bit.
So bring in the first bullet there.
Okay, yeah, yep.
Or maybe you bring in them all 3 there. I don't
No,
know.
I think
But
the
if you
first
bring them in
bullet,
one at a time.
the first bullet makes sense because you say compete for the broadcast, and then I can say just this section here about the winning coalition, and then give this second bullet, and then maybe the third bullet is whatever. I mean, maybe
Sure.
maybe the third bullet is, I don't know.
Maybe you can leave it off. I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. But yeah. that makes
This needs a little work, but this helps. Go ahead.
No, it's good. It's a good slide.
Okay, so, all right, so following the competition in the global workspace, the coalition with the highest activation wins the competition and then ultimately is broadcast. That's what we refer to as the conscious broadcast. It's broadcast because it goes out to all of the LIDA modules. Okay, so now what we've explained here is the relationship between the current situational model, the global workspace, and the attention codelets, and how these support the attention phase of LIDA. Okay, so
I saw it's screen problem. No, okay. Go ahead.
so all right, next we're going to talk about procedural memory. And the first thing I want to do to make sure that nobody has a misunderstanding of what we mean by procedural memory is not how to achieve a goal. For example, it doesn't specify how to ride a bike. It's different. I'll explain what it means, but keep that in mind. Keep open minds on what we're talking about.
Is there a segment of the literature that uses it in that fashion?
I suspect so. I mean, no, I'm not. I mean, in our fashion or in the fashion of how.
Well, in the psychology of
It almost, I've never seen anybody who uses it in this fashion except us.
yeah, but what I'm saying, so there is a segment of the literature that uses it in this way he's warning against.
Yes.
It's everybody else.
Yeah, okay.
And to that point in the presentation last Wednesday, this is exactly how Phil defined it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is important because I can totally imagine if we didn't start with this warning, they'd be thinking, what the hell, hands would be going up, people would be screaming. So, yeah, so that's just the warning. So what we mean by procedural memory. So procedural memory, first off, it's a long-term memory store, and it stores never conscious knowledge. So as I mentioned before, LIDA distinguishes unconscious processes into 2 different varieties: pre-conscious, like we saw in the pre-conscious workspace, and never conscious knowledge, like we're seeing here. It means the agent will never be conscious specifically of these representations. what the representations encode is they encode how likely it is that an action is to achieve a particular result when the agent takes that action from a current state. And we refer to that current state as a context.
Okay. Just one little thing. The way you worded it when you said it is better, because the way it's written up there, that first line stands alone, how likely an action is. It's like, oh, so it's the probability of an action, but that's not what it is. So,
I see. So
what I'm
it's
saying?
the pauses are wrong. It's like the breaking is not.
Well, if you say how likely it is that an action, and then
Yeah.
then they know that there's no chance for misinterpretation. Will achieve.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a minor thing, but it could.
Yep. How likely it is that an action will achieve a result when taken from the agent's current state. Looks good to me. Do you agree?
I have a concern about saying that procedural memory is never conscious. I can think about a particular scheme and think that in this situation, if I do this, this will happen.
See, I
So
thought that.
this really isn't what we mean by never conscious.
So I guess going into that, and we haven't really talked too much about. Obviously, an agent can have certain declarative knowledge about how to do things, right? And I would have thought that that would have supported more of the conscious understanding of it. So you think that, okay, so what you're thinking is, well, like an expectation codelet, what it brings to consciousness?
No, I'm not saying that we dealt with that in the model at all. We haven't.
Yeah,
But people normally can think that if I do such, I can have the thought, if I do such and such under such and such circumstance, this will happen.
agreed, but
But
I
that's
don't
not
think
in
that comes from procedural memory. But procedural memory is just a
It
mechanism.
doesn't come from procedural memory.
Yes, we need to point it out.
But the content can be conscious. A scheme, schemes don't come to consciousness, they're never
Right.
conscious as schemes, that's right. But we can have something that comes to conscious that looks just like a scheme.
But it's going to come from declarative memory
Yeah,
into the
right.
pre-conscious
Well,
workspace.
it won't come from declarative memory. It might.
Yeah, that's how I always thought about it, is that declarative memory would have that, what psychologists, well, not even what psychologists, it's just like the recipe to bake a cake, for example. We understand how to do certain things, and that's very conscious.
I guess my point is that I don't see that it buys us anything to point out never conscious.
Yeah, it could trip some people up.
Yeah,
If you don't want them, you don't want to have to stop in the middle of the
I think it's
talk and
correct,
explain
but
what I just said.
Yeah, I think you're correct by saying it's never conscious, but I see Stan's point.
Yeah,
It's just gonna,
I think for the paper, we're gonna have to call out never conscious, especially if we try to.
in the paper we can do this, but not for the talk.
Okay,
I agree.
okay. That sounds fine with me.
And a colon should always be preceded by a complete sentence, so.
I'm a rebel.
Not on slides.
Bad.
I could do an arrow.
Huh?
I could do an arrow.
Or
finger
nothing.
pointing.
But whatever, you can do what you want, I'm just gonna
Throw
wrinkle my
tomatoes.
nose.
I don't think the colon really matters one way or the other. I think I've done that in a couple different places, so if you see it again, just call it out. All right. All right, so I just lost, every time I go out, I lose my time with the total thing. So let's see, it is 4:56, we're 56 minutes in. Okay, so we talked about that stuff. All right, so procedural memory. Actually, I probably want to do this. Let me go ahead and do that first before we get to the thing at the bottom. Maybe I need to animate things on. Okay, so this long-term knowledge of, how likely it is that an action will achieve a result when taken from the agent's current state is encoded in a data structure that we call a scheme, which has 3 parts: a context, an action, and a result. And there's another parameter, which is a 4th part to this structure, called the base level activation, which really encodes how likely this thing is to come about.
You may have to point out at this point, a scheme is another fairly common psychological term without this meaning. It has a completely different meaning.
Oh, you mean this pull-up schema? You mean why we call it scheme, or is there scheme as a psychological term too?
Our usage
No,
from,
maybe I'm thinking of schema.
our usage is from Drescher, isn't it?
No, we got this from Drescher, who calls it schema.
Schema,
But
yeah.
why we call it scheme instead is because schema
Schema.
is a.
Yeah. I think
Right,
it's-
it's a loaded term.
So
Right.
erase, sorry.
If somebody does bring up schema and say, is there a relationship, then I can talk to that a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to avoid that conversation altogether
Yeah,
just by
but
saying schemes.
That may do it. Go ahead.
Okay, so procedural memory as a module. So from an input standpoint, procedural memory receives the conscious broadcast. And once it's received the conscious broadcast, it goes through the process of trying to figure out which of its schemes match in either context or result to what the conscious broadcast contains. So if the conscious broadcast indicates that the context or the state that the agent is currently in is highly relevant to a scheme, or if there's something about the result that matches strongly against the conscious broadcast, the scheme's activation is increased, and the set of schemes that have their activation over some predetermined threshold will then become candidate behaviors, which are instantiated schemes, which will be sent over to action selection. By instantiated, what this means is that there are certain parameters within the scheme that may need to be bound to the particulars of a given situation, meaning that the scheme itself may be more templatized compared to the specifics needed by the agent for the situation. Okay, so the action selection module. The action selection module supports 4 different modes of action selection. So the first of these modes, volitional action selection, is a deliberative action selection. For example, if the agent were trying to figure out what to order on a menu, the agent's entirely conscious of those different options, and action selection is the process of choosing between one of those options. For consciously mediated action selection, the agent may be partaking in an action, an activity in which the action is determined by whatever the state is that the agent's currently in, or something that is currently in the conscious broadcast, but may not be aware of the fact that it is about to take that action, or that it's choosing something consciously. For autonomized action selection, this is a sequence of actions that the agent is able to take without directly attending to that action selection process. So for example, an agent might be in a process of talking to another agent and at the same time maybe driving a car. In this case, the behavior of driving the car may be so thoroughly automatized, so thoroughly overlearned, that the agent does not need to attend to it directly in order to engage in that behavior. And I want to get a better flow of how to explain
You're
that.
talking about automatized? at this point?
Automatized, yeah.
As far as I know, there's nothing in driving an automobile that's automatized.
Okay.
I think that just doesn't work. The example that works is walking, where one step calls the next, but now that's the automatized one.
How do you make the distinction between the two? I mean, when I'm taking steps, I might be accommodating stairs, I might be accommodating
Oh, no.
other things.
But
In those cases, it's not the same.
No, it's not that all walking is automatized. It's
Okay.
If I look out and see nothing is in front of me, then one step can call the next for the next 2 or 3 steps
Mhm.
before they,
Okay,
but the automobile is not a good, driving is not a good example.
okay, that would fit into consciously mediated instead?
Yeah, it's almost
Okay.
all consciously mediated, except it can sometimes be an alarm.
What about the braking it very quickly before I realize?
That's
Just the alarm.
alarm.
Okay.
That's the alarm,
Okay. Okay,
yeah.
all right, yeah, I'll make sure to get better at describing those.
One thing about walking is that a decerebrate animal can do it.
Hmm?
Oh, right, yeah.
What did you say?
A decerebrate animal can do it.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's the cutoff or not.
Okay. So, in alarms, these are emergency situations that may bypass a lot of the conscious machinery and directly cause in the case of a very urgent action, may result in an override to other usual processes. The braking is, I guess, a good example of that. So slamming on the brakes in the car when there's an animal that runs in front of the car, something like that. Okay, so action selection may result in either external or internal actions. External actions are taken on the external environment. Internal actions may just result in new representations being built in the preconscious workspace. For example, mental imagery or other kinds of internal imaginative processes.
Change of goal state? A decision? An internal decision? That
Is that
just occurred to me.
so? Where you're intending to do something else? Or
Yeah, I just suddenly changed my intention,
Yeah, I'm
my
sure.
goal state.
What do you
It
think,
just
Stan?
occurred
Is
to me.
that? He's asking about an internal action example.
I've never had good examples come to mind.
Well, I'm gonna stick with mental imagery then.
One internal action is to create a timekeeper in the,
Right, for volitional,
or ideomotor theory,
right.
and that comes up.
By definition, when you say internal action, first you need an internal environment. Action must somehow execute it on the environment.
Yeah,
Yeah, that gets a little tricky too, because one of the examples
I
with,
can imagine myself riding a bicycle out along this path that I remember
Mhm,
someplace, and that imagining
mhm. Sure, yeah, exactly.
is an internal action. The riding can be an internal action, is being imagined.
So going to Dachi's example, I actually have a question about that. So when we say internal environment, are we talking about where we have a sensor to something that's going on in the body?
Yes,
Does it also include imaginings and things in the
that
preconscious?
would be a virtual environment,
Okay, so-
but a virtual environment would be internal.
But so the internal action should change what I sense in the future from the internal environment as one of its side effects.
Yeah, but it probably would.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so.
Well, it's a little, yeah, I guess it's interesting because you could take an external action that impacts the internal environment, and you can also have these virtual things that have no direct correspondence with, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, I mean, it's,
Anything that's like a choice,
yeah,
but that doesn't have any immediate, like I decide to meditate.
mhm,
There's no actuator that's necessarily
yeah.
activated by that, but there's a change in my.
Yeah, it's definitely an internal action. I mean, I agree with the internal action. I guess the thing I was spinning with is that is the meaning of internal action that it affects the internal environment? Or is it more nuanced than that, where it could either affect the internal environment, meaning an internal sensor, Or if introspection is a sensor, I guess that's the same kind of thing. Maybe that's what it is. It's introspection or something. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, okay. Okay, so within the action, we mentioned before that action selection is one of the two modules that are not asynchronous. So there is a competition also in the action selection module, in which the candidate behaviors, which are supplied by procedural memory, would compete. This competition is initiated by triggers in exactly the same way that, or at least under the exact same conditions that the global workspace triggers specify the initiation of a competition. And one of the ways that we've typically thought of the implementation of action selection is through is it Maze behavior net? Patty Maze?
Is it Mize or Maze? I'm not sure. Stan would know.
Yeah, me.
By the way, it occurred to me as you shifted away, if somebody asks about internal action, probably the easiest thing would be to like saying, changing the position of an imagined Tetris
Sure.
piece or something, an internal rotation.
Yeah.
That you could certainly.
Yeah, all the mental imagery stuff, that seems like a clearer way of explaining it. Yep.
So those other ambiguous things we don't have to bring up.
Yes. Stan, how would you pronounce that word at the bottom with M-A-E-S for her name?
Patty Mize?
Potty Moz,
Moz.
Moz.
Potty Moz.
Yeah.
Potty.
Moz.
Well,
Patty?
I'm not sure whether she pronounces it Patty or Potty, but
What's her ethnic origin?
Dutch maybe? I think Dutch. Yeah.
And she's at MIT?
She is.
She certainly was,
Okay.
She still is. I did a search on her.
yeah.
Okay. So the action selection module, it receives candidate behaviors from procedural memory. The behavior net, based upon a set of links between the different candidate behaviors, will pass activation to different candidate behaviors. This activation can be passed, this is where the laser pointer would be helpful. Different kinds of links can exist between different candidate behaviors. For example, when different preconditions are satisfied, a successor link may pass activation to a candidate behavior. Similarly, you have these backwards links that could also pass activation. I need to make sure I get this terminology right. So yeah, predecessor link, yeah, strength is in sync. I gotta practice this part more. So there's successor, predecessor links, and conflictor links. Anyway, the intention of the diagram is that the red ones are the conflictor links, the purple ones are the successor links, and the yellow ones are the predecessor links. But I'm not good enough to talk to that yet. I need to practice that more. Once one of the behaviors is selected as a result of this competition, several things happen.